Now the back view is going to be a little bit more is a little bit different and a little bit more thinking involved in this, because you have to remember that not only do we have the cabinet, but when we turn it around and look at the back side, this stuff is now going to be on the other side, right? We have a reversed image. So as we start to draw this, our parameters are going to be similar. So I'm going to come up that it was 80 inches, I believe, and I'm going to come from this line right over there. I'm going to click and come over, I think it was 40 inches over and 80 inches down. And I should have a dividing line where this is. And if we draw everything nice and even with each other with the start lines, then these lines should come straight over and be in the right spot. So that's what we want there. And then we can draw that overhang on. We were coming off 1.5 inches, 1.5 down 7/8 and back in and off 1.5 and down 7/8 and back in. Okay, so there's my two cabinets. Now, I didn't just copy this because first off, it needs to flip. And also the back is going to be 3/4 of an inch. This was 1.5 inches on the front because that is where the face frame is. Now on the back, we see the plywood view. We don't see the face frame. So I'm going to come in 3/4 of an inch, 0.75, and I'm going to draw my lines down there. And same here, 0.75. And I'm going to come in from here, 0.75. And I'm going to come in from here, 0.75. And on my top, I'm going to come down 0.75 and draw that over. And from the floor of the top piece, I'm going to come up 0.75. Our plywood is 3/4 of an inch thick. That's why I'm choosing 0.75. From the top, I'm going to come down 0.75 and draw that line over. Now, the one that's different is the bottom. So we should have 3 inches plus 1.5 inches. We drew this at 4.5 inches. And I'm actually going to drop this 1/16 of an inch. So I'm going to draw this at 4 7/16. That way, when I go and I router this, or when I'm done building, I don't have a chance of this lip being high. I want the plywood to be behind this lip. So if I build this lip high and the plywood sits 1/16 of an inch lower, it gives me just a little bit of room to router off. And so that's where I'm coming up with that 4 7/16. And then we're going to come down 3/4 and connect the lines over. So now I need to come in and put in my basic joinery. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see here. On the top would be a rabbet. So actually the side would get the rabbet. So right here, I'm going to come in 3/8 and I'm going to come up to the top and I'm just going to erase this little piece that's left over. So now my rabbet is drawn on the side of the cabinet and my top is in there. I'm going to pan over to the other side and we're going to do the same thing. That was 3/8 in and up to the top, and I'm going to erase this little section here. And I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to take my zoom here and zoom back in. Now I zoomed into these two. It's going to allow me to see everything here and I don't have to move quite as much. So I'm going to have a rabbet on this side again. So that's going to be 3/8 in and down. And here is going to be 3/8 in and up. And I'm going to come in with my eraser tool and erase that line and that line. Again, we're panning over to the other side. And I'm going to come in 3/8 and down in. So I came in 3/8 and I'm going to draw that line up to the top, and then I'm going to take my eraser tool and erase that and that. And I can hit this spot here because that piece goes all the way through. Now we're going to move down to the bottom. And this as well should be in 3/8. So we're going to come in 3/8 and up to there. If it's not snapping, we can do 3/4 tall. And I'm going to take my eraser tool and erase that line there. While you're here, you can erase this bottom because that piece of wood does not go all the way through. We're going to come over here and do the same thing. 3/8 by 3/4. That one's snapping in for us. And take my eraser tool and erase that. So as we zoom out, and let's take a look at this project here. So this is representing our cabinet. Now we have some more details to enter on the back view. And the thing we need to enter is where this divider is. And so I want my plywood to be right in the center of this. So if I take my measuring tool and measure from here over to the center, I might have to zoom in a little bit for it to let me do that. So from the center to the outside edge, I am 14 1/4. So I'm going to zoom back out, zoom into this cabinet, and that was 14 1/4 from outside. So I'm going to take my pencil, I'm going to click here, and I'm going to come out 14.25. And remember, this is my center line, not my edges. So now I'm going to come from here, and I'm going to come back over 3/8 one direction. And that line can go all the way down. And I'm going to come from that line. And actually, maybe at this point, what I'll do is I will delete this other line because we no longer need it. And then I can come over a full 3/4 because that's 3/8 the other side of the line. And then this needs to be jointed in. So we're going to come up 3/8, just like on our other joints, and over 3/4 and back down. And I was trying not to zoom in, but I'm going to have to anyways to erase. And zoom out, zoom in, and I'm going to come down 3/8 and over 3/4 and back up and erase that little line that's there. Okay. Now, I just did what I told you guys not to do, and I put that on the same side. So what I actually need to do is move this over now. I could undo everything I did and redraw, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to come from the edge over 14.25, enter. I'm going to find that line. You can draw it up because I don't need it to be down. And then I'm going to come over another 3/8, and that's going to represent my outside piece. I need this to come down a little bit further to the edge. So that line and this point are going to be the same. So I'm going to grab my 4-arrow move tool, grab that corner. Actually, right now I'm going to grab this corner, this bottom one, and move that right there. Okay, and now I have a little bit of lines to delete. I'm going to delete that, that, and all of that. I don't need any of that. So there it is. It's now a mirrored image and is a good representation of what we have. Now I need to figure out these shelves. I need to put them in as well. So if I come in and take some measurements from the bottom of the cabinet to the top of that shelf is 20 inches. And from the bottom of the cabinet to the top of that shelf is 37.5. So now as I'm working over here, I have some parameters, 20 and 37.5. So I'm going to come from the bottom up 20, but I'm going to drop the shelf a 1/16 of an inch so we can route it out. So I'm going to go 19 space 15 16ths. That way the plywood sits a 1/16 of an inch lower than the front of that. And then I'm going to come down 3/4, 3/4, and connect that line to there. Now the other one was 37.5, I believe. Let's verify. Yep, 37.5. And so that, I took that measurement from the bottom. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to come up 37.5, which is there. But if you remember, I want to come down a 1/16 of an inch. I'm going to come down 1/16, and it should be the bottom of those two lines. Let's zoom in a little bit closer. All right, so I'm coming in here. I should have two nodes, one a 1/16 of an inch above the other. You can see I'm getting two different ones there. I want the lower one. I'm going to draw that over to there, and I'm going to come down 3/4 and connect that across. Oops, that needs to come straight across. And that's going to be 3/8 of an inch in, just like our other joints here. And I'm going to go 3/4 up. Now there's a little bit of cleaning up to do on these, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer and take my eraser tool. I'm going to erase there and there. And pencil tool again. And I'm going to come over here, 3/8 up to there. So now that we got that erased, we also need to come down to this bottom shelf and do the same thing here. That was 3/8 in. Again, 3/8 because that's half the thickness of the wood. The plywood is 3/4 of an inch thick. Whoops. And I'm going to take my eraser and erase that line, and that line. All right, so we're starting to get a representation of our project here. What you would maybe see down on the bottom would be your trim. We can draw that on there. So that was out 7/8 and up 3, and out 7/8 and up 3. We can get rid of this little line here. Up top, we could draw that crown molding on, and it would actually come down to about 1 inch lower. Which is there. And then we're going to come up to 3. I'm going to come out 3, connect it back down. And I can erase this. Well, and there would be some depth here. It would be about 3/4 of an inch thick. So we could come back in. Actually, let's go 7/8. Something like that. And then we would erase this excess material. And then again here. To just come in a full 1 inch. That one doesn't look quite symmetrical there. But that just gives us our reference point to what that crown molding is going to look like on our project. So at this point, I think the back is pretty well finished. What we need to do is just make sure everything is dimensioned. So I'm going to take out all of this. And this back view, we don't necessarily need to put the wood grain on because the pieces are so small and it's just all plywood layers. But the important thing on the back view is that everything is labeled from dado to dado. We want to know how big everything is from outside to outside. Now, if we have it here, we don't need to do it up here. How far is it from this dado to the top shelf? And from floor to, we want to just have all of these dimensions laid out. So there's no questioning later on how big things are as we're building. We have all these measurements correctly in place. And you may need to zoom in a little bit to get the right dimension lines on the right node. And I'm going to want to know how far that is from the very far edge, because we're going to have to lay all this out. So I want to know from that dado to that edge and so forth, all of the different parameters. You need to have everything labeled and dimensioned. So how high is this from the floor? 4 7/16 is where it should be. That didn't pull out straight. Whoops. So I'm going to do that again. From the floor to that and pull it out straight. How long is that shelf? Should be the same length as the top one. How big was this whole cabinet? All right, the other thing I want to put in here that isn't on here is my barrel rest. And so I'm going to take my pencil tool, and again, it doesn't really matter where it's at. It's going to be straight across, and it's going to be about 7/8 thick. And I'm going to connect those lines. And that's what we'd see there. Now, how that's going to be attached could be done a couple ways, but the way that I find works the best is to put a little 3/4 by 3/4 type block underneath there for support, the same length as the barrel rest. That gives it something easy to attach onto. There's multiple ways you could do this, but in the past we've been successful with this approach, and it's up to you if you want to go that route or not. 3/4 by 3/4. You could even do 1 inch by 1 inch, but just so you can visualize that on there. And then we're going to need to know the length of the barrel rest, which is not right here because that's a different measurement. So let's pull that across. And that should be the one that we need there. I'm going to re-pull this dimension here because it's crooked, and it's just to make sure we've got the right size. There we go. Let's see this snapped in straight. There we go. And just to make sure it was accurate, we wanted to re-pull that. So you can see none of my dimension lines are going through the text of another part or another dimension line. And so that's important. We want to make sure everything's nice and visible. We can tell where everything starts and stops. Now, again, the height of this doesn't matter at this point. It's just a reference so we can calculate the material when we're making our cut list. So I think that will be enough for our drawings for now. Go ahead and make these adjustments, and then you're going to submit your work in Google Classroom.